Thank you, and if you're not from San Diego, welcome, and hope you like it here. We enjoy it. It's a thrill to be here. I think I mentioned last year when I was here, it was now Dr. Jameson, probably 5 years ago, we were beginning to work on the Sanford stem cell business plan, and we were taking some leaps of faith at the time in terms of what we thought that would mean, and I have to say I'm in awe of where we are now. I think we didn't know where the science was going to go. We took a leap of faith and put a inpatient unit into the Jacobs Medical Center and an outpatient clinic in the new outpatient pavilion, which we just got licensed last week. It'll be opening next week, and the stem cell clinic will be moving into the outpatient pavilion next week. So I'm the leader of your fan club. I don't understand most of what you all do, but I can tell you that it excites me to be part of it and to help support all the work that you're doing. So with that, I'm going to allow the panel members to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into some questions. You want to start on the other end? Okay, Dr. Jameson.
I'm Kat, and I gave a talk this morning. I direct our Alpha Stem Cell Clinic here.
I'm John Adams. I'm the director of the Alpha Stem Cell Clinic at UCLA, UC Irvine.
And I'm Maria Milan, the president and CEO of CIRM, and I'm proud to have been with the Alpha Clinics when we launched it, and we actually had our first meeting here at this very occasion, the first annual symposium, so it's great to be here.
Afternoon, Joe Chachi. I'm a neurosurgeon here at UC San Diego and a principal investigator on several clinical trials, including stem cell trials for spinal cord injury.
Hi, I'm Sheila Chari. I'm editor-in-chief at Cell Stem Cell, and the journal's located in Cambridge, but I work remotely from Los Angeles, so I'm kind of local.
John Hood. I'm the CEO and founder of Impact Biomedicines.
Well, great. Thank you, and thanks to all the panel members for being here. I'd actually like to kind of go off script already and go straight to Maria and ask, 5 years ago, we were just beginning. Now, as you look back, what do you think have been the most significant transformational changes have happened? Are we where you thought we would be, and where do you think we're going to go?
I think that looking back 5 years ago, I could not have imagined that we'd be here today. I share your view in terms of that we've actually over-delivered in a really good way in some respects. And I'll say, when we first put the Alpha Clinics concept proposal together, which I was involved in, and then the process to get it funded, we were wondering, was this field mature enough to have enough customers for such a specialized clinic? And within the first year of launching, we were flooded by really high-quality clinical trials. Thank you to the leadership of the directors, Kat, John Adams, John Zay at City of Hope. And now we have over 48, almost 50 clinical trials with cutting-edge technologies in a variety of technology platforms, from immunotherapy to cell replacement strategies to direct treatment for spinal cord injury and blindness, and all these disease states that are considered incurable. So that is spectacular. We'll talk a little bit more, but that's also coincident with kind of a turning point that we're experiencing with increased industry pull. So more of our programs have been getting, we call ourselves the de-riskers, CIRM funds programs, that the science is really cool. Could it be a therapy? It seems to many traditional investors to not be a good bet yet. So CIRM will fund the initial research and maybe the initial trials. That gives more of a comfort level, and then the even very risk non-risk averse investors initially wouldn't have invested in, but then when they saw that it makes sense and has potential for benefit, they then come in. So we're really proud of that, and it couldn't be done without this community and ecosystem of high-quality researchers and the infrastructure which the Alpha Clinics network represents. So we appreciate that the institutions, UCSD as well as the other host institutions for the Alpha Clinics, when they came in, they were judged not only on the strength of the people, of the projects that they intend to come in, but also the strength of the institutional support. That was a major piece of why the Alpha Clinics were chosen. And I'm happy to say that this past year, we've expanded the Alpha Clinics network to 2 additional institutions in Northern California, UCSF Benioff, as well as UC Davis.
Great, thank you. I think one of the most amazing things about this is the collaboration across the campuses. And, you know, I can tell you from my point of view in dealing with UC, you know, we're siblings and we're competitive, but we also try to work together sometimes. But you all do it every day. It's really been demonstrated, maybe starting with Dr. Adams, but I know several of you are across institutions bringing collaborations together where they haven't been before. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've done that.
Yeah, so it was sort of an interesting trip. When we first got our grants funded, our Alpha Stem Cell Clinic grants funded, there was supposed to be a coordinating center that was supposed to be like our mothership, someplace we could go for aid and support. Well, that didn't get funded, so the Alpha Stem Cell Clinics had to rely upon one another to be able to figure out how to get to the stage where we could bring all of these preclinical therapeutics into the clinical arena. And that was a real challenge to begin with, but because we had, you know, Kat and John Zaya were so pliable and everybody got along so well, it really worked out extraordinarily well. So I can tell you the things that we've sort of developed as a clinic, and I think the one word that really describes us is that we share. So we have ways, we have an IRB reliance agreement, which we share. We have common contracting agreements that we share. We have patient cohort finding tools, which we share. We have recruitment tools, which we share. We have educational programs that we share. We have certain kinds of specialists, like the nurses at City of Hope, that really teach us how to, if nursing is required, how we can use those to the benefit, not just at City of Hope, but all of our clinics. So I think the one common denominator here is that we've been able to share, and by sharing, we can then actually say, for instance, Kat has a trial, and she wants to see if it can be done at UCLA. So she said, oh, well, find us an investigator at UCLA who wants to do this trial. And then once we get that going and we know that it will work in that sort of beta testing environment, then we can expand it to the rest of the Alpha Stem Cell Clinic network. So at UCLA and UCI, we've been pretty lucky because we're 2 centers and we have our own built-in beta testing capability. So if UCI develops an investigator-initiated protocol and they want to test it in another environment like UCLA, then we're their beta test, and we can go ahead and see if it'll work in our environment. And if it works in our environment, it's likely UCLA is big, so it'll probably work in almost any environment. So that's kind of the way we've been sharing things and expanding our operations, all the way from adopting industry-funded clinical trials and certainly developing investigator-initiated trials.
That's great. Do some of the other panel members want to weigh in on the collaboration part of this?
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in on that because I think that has been a really unexpected surprise, this ability to share between supposedly competitive institutions. We're real partners in this process of trying to bring innovative cell therapies and other stem cell-related therapies to patients who desperately need them. So we got rid of that silly competitive thing and started just saying, hey, let's work together. So that started very much in the beginning because Maria told us we had to play well in the sandbox together because she ran the program. But it's really been a joy, and things have just taken off. So I'll give you an example. So John's been very modest here because it was actually UCLA that spearheaded the idea of having the IRB reliance, where if one IRB approved the protocol, it would be approved by every other site. And that was together with Steve Peckman. So we just didn't think it could be done. Well, it was done because John really pushed for it. And so we had to acquiesce and say, okay, we'll do it. So it was that kind of push, and then John Zaya said, well, we think we can have a universal contract, not the budget, but the contractual language should be similar among sites. Why shouldn't it be? You know, lawyers make a lot of money out of trying to reinvent the wheel. So we just said, forget that. We're going to share confidentiality agreements and also CTAs, clinical trial agreements. That was huge. I didn't expect that that would work. And I think there's one word that defines the Serum Alpha Stem Cell Clinic Network, and it's Japanese. And I heard that when I went to Japan just after Fukushima. It was one word, ganbate, which means never, ever, ever give up. It doesn't occur. It was Churchill too. Maybe it came after Churchill. See, maybe it came at around the same time in history, Dr. Chachi. So anyway, it just doesn't seem to occur to anybody in this team that we could or should give up, because there are patients that really rely on this network. And so I'll just give you one rather poignant example of, I mentioned talent, tenacity, teamwork this morning in terms of the three things I believe in. The other one is timing. So there was a patient who wanted to get on a drug, the antibody that I'd mentioned earlier today called Sirumtuzumab. He was at home on hospice, a poet, very eloquent poet. Anyway, he wanted to come off hospice and try Sirumtuzumab for his sarcoma that was very advanced. And I said, oh, I don't think this is going to work. And he said, I just want one last chance. And he was near UCLA. So I emailed John at 10:30 at night on a Sunday, of course. And he
It was actually Friday.
Was it Friday? Okay, well,
The weekend I had to do with.
I responded at 10:30 at night on a Sunday. No, so anyway, there was an initial volley on the Friday, and then I thought, no, we can't do this, it's not going to happen. But the sponsor, Oncternal, was keen. We had CERM input, but then we said, aha, we have the IRB reliance. We could actually use this. But it turned out we didn't even need it because John found an investigator. He actually found two investigators at UCLA that were willing to take on this patient with an emergency IND. The FDA called back within 12 hours. And then we had the IND, the emergency IND, within 24 hours. The IRB approval occurred within a week, just at UCLA. The patient was treated. John Zaya helped. He also got back to me right away. And the patient was treated. Ultimately, he succumbed to his disease, but his eulogy was in the New York Times, and it was basically self-written. He was so grateful for being part of research. It was almost too poignant for me. But anyway, the point is we have to, if you read, I keep going back to Shakespeare and Macbeth, mainly because some of my patients want me to be better educated. So one of my patients in clinic, a few months ago stood up and he said, Dr. Jameson, I have something for you. I said, what's that? And he gives me this printout from a book. I said, this is Macbeth. And he said, yes. And I said, and you underlined this. So what are you saying? So he's in his 90s. But anyway, he feels like we've lost our sense of urgency. So it was the quote from Macbeth, if it were done, 'tis done, 'twere best it were done quickly. So timing matters, and we can only sustain that timing with a team to do full alliteration. That's what I think is so amazing.
Full alliteration, I like that.
Terrific. Just go ahead. Did you have a comment, John? Okay, staying on the topic of collaboration, but also obstacles, maybe Dr. Chachi, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the obstacles, impediments that you've hit, but also how you've kind of worked your way through it.
Certainly.
And
I think relying on all the collaborative efforts and all the background before you do something translational is really important, and then staying true to the sort of the mission and also to the science involved. But the biggest obstacle is fear. We have nothing to fear but fear itself, by the way. The biggest obstacle is fear, because when you translate something to a human clinical trial, you really are taking a great responsibility to do something that carries a lot of risk to it, you know? And if it's, especially if it's something like some of the things that we've done, which have never been done to humans before, it's a tremendous responsibility. And so screening those patients and communicating with those patients and being honest with those patients and their families about expectations and risks associated with it are things that you really have to pay a lot of attention to. And so it's not so much that it becomes an obstacle at that point, but it is something that's very time-consuming and has to be done with great responsibility. And so you can't rush things, even though sometimes time is of the essence. You really do have to be very careful and respect the science of it. There's the humanity part of it, which is super important and drives us all, but we have to do it scientifically, by the scientific method, so that the results of what we do are not just measured in one patient's nice story, but hopefully in the literature and maybe changing the practice of medicine. That's really what we're looking to do. And so we have not lost that sense of urgency. We should not rest on all these great accomplishments that we were talking about here. We really have to think that the next step is the biggest step. And that's the step where we actually fill the hospital with patients that have come not only for experiment, but for better outcomes for the devastating diseases that they have.
I like the emphasis on the scientific method. I think one thing that we have a problem with that we're beginning to see more and more on the health system side are physicians coming through with non-scientifically based stem cell products, and they want to come and do certain things, and we're trying to get a handle on how to shut that down. Interested in again, the panel's view on that development and how, now that we're kind of getting to the point where we're putting this into clinical use, how we navigate that landscape a little bit.
Well, I think that's the scariest part for me personally, because having done some of these experiments, I'm contacted very, very frequently by companies that want you to get on board because they have a stem cell product that treats X, Y, Z, and it's really not based on evidence-based medicine or any type of result, but it is very well marketed to patients, like you see the commercials for medication and stuff. So the stem cell, quote unquote, treatments that are commercially available are very well marketed to patients in the right demographic, the types of patients that are highly motivated, very successful people who would be willing to spend money to do these things. And that is something we should really be careful about, especially as the group that we are, Alpha Clinic, academics, and UC San Diego. We want to reach as many patients as possible. We want to fill the place, but we have to be very thoughtful about it. So I think that's a really important question that you're asking, and I'm really glad that we're thinking about that.
Actually, I think our namesake, Denny Sanford, came up with an idea of having a registry of kind of approved and not approved, and I don't know if something like that would work, but I can tell you just on the ground, and someone who's not in your domain or in your space, it's an issue for us to figure out how to navigate. But moving on to Dr. Chari, if you don't mind maybe spending a little bit of time talking about some of the key points to consider when preparing a paper for submission, and advice you would give to faculty scientists who are developing new avenues for publication.
Yeah, sure, I can take that on. So I think the advice I'd give to someone submitting a paper to Cell Stem Cell would apply to any journal that you're thinking of submitting a paper to. And I think after you've written your paper, the most important thing to do when you're thinking about where to submit it is just to read the related literature that journal is publishing now. Because things are always, what's published now was submitted several months ago, maybe even a year ago. Stem cell science can be slow. And so I think it's important to really think about what's been published and whether or not the paper that you've written is really in line with that. And if you are concerned or about whether or not it's a good candidate for the journal, it's really relationship that is open. It's not just, don't just submit a paper to a journal without thinking about contacting us. When we reply to people when they give us pre-submission inquiries, it's not just a yes or no. We really try to engage in a conversation with authors about what we're looking for, and whether or not we think certain aspects of the paper are strong or not. And so I really recommend having communication with the editorial staff of any journal that you're thinking about submitting to.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Hood, if you don't mind maybe sharing a little bit about some of the challenges with the FDA and how you work on getting trials off hold, and any advice you have for the scientific community around that.
Yeah, sure. Well, the key thing is much what fits with what Joe was saying. It has to be data-driven. To move a drug forward, it has to have a positive risk-benefit analysis, and the FDA are people just like anyone else, so perception and reality doesn't necessarily meet up. That was the biggest issue we had with our drug, is kind of the opposite of what you're facing with some of these guys, in the sense that the perception was this thing may have this toxicity issue, when in fact, closer examination of the data, it really doesn't, and in fact, it's a drug that had, response rate on the primary response in a trial with people who have nothing else available was about 2/3 of the patients responded, whereas standard of care only circa 1/3 of naive patients do. So it's the most efficacious drug. In fact, it was safer. And the case we had to make with the FDA was essentially look at the data. It's the same thing as anything. It's no different. One of the experiments is no different than with your reviewers on the paper. Just look at the data. And if you are compelling and you don't give up, to go back to what Kat said, you have to have some perseverance, because in our case, we had a drug that Sanofi had killed 3 years ago, a very large pharmaceutical company, and then they've got a group of 6 people in San Diego saying, no, this shouldn't have happened. We had to get through to them that we're doing this because it's for the patients. If you simply look at the data, it has the best benefit risk profile of any drug for these patients. That's it, really. Let the facts do the talking for you. And you're not going to convince them if you don't have the facts on your side. Just
Right.
get that data out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm going to keep asking questions, but I want to pause here and just make sure, is there any question in the audience that you'd like to ask? This is an incredible panel with incredible expertise. So any question?
Can I just follow on that FDA
Sure.
question?
That'd be great.
When we're developing trials to move into the clinic, to actually get to the starting line where we actually give a product to a human being, our major roadblock in getting to that step is submitting what we call bulletproof FDA applications.
Yeah.
That is, applications that come from our investigators that sort of anticipate exactly what the FDA would be questioning and answering those questions in the initial application. And by shortening in that time frame the amount of back and forth we have to go through with the FDA to get a drug into the clinic has really been beneficial to us. So I can tell you that we spend a lot of the personnel in our alpha stem cell clinic actually focus on that very issue. How do you get the best people to advise these investigators who may know nothing about the FDA or submitting a new IND or an IDE? How do you actually educate them and their team to get to the point where they can actually submit a really great first-time FDA application? So I would agree that that's a major roadblock for many of us even now.
Great. Yes, go ahead.
On that point, do you have a base program of advice for pre-IND meeting prior to the actual?
Yes. So within UCLA, you would think that we would have an expert or experts that we could rely upon, or those kinds, but we found that we really didn't. We tried 2 or 3 venues that advertised they had these kinds of experts for pre-IND and IND meetings, putting those applications together. And we found that we didn't have a group at UCLA that could do that very quickly and efficiently. So we actually went out and we hired consultants, and we've got a panel of these consultants now that we've actually tried and they've delivered for us. And so we just are matchmakers at this point, where we put the investigator that we think would fit really well with this particular consultant, I&D consultant. We put those two people together, and they go at it for about a month, and the end product is a great application.
And I wanted to follow up on that. So when Patty and David Brenner and Larry Goldstein and I were putting together the Sanford Stem Cell Clinical Center piece for Denny Sanford to consider, what we thought is we should basically work on pipeline as well as product. So in other words, we thought we should have the equivalent of embedded reporters for regulatory support. And we've got Vicki Scheckler in the back here. Vicki, who helps with pre-INDs, and Kimmy, who helps with INDs, so investigational new drug applications. The two work incredibly closely together, and then Kimmy does our adverse event reporting when we actually do the trial. So then, you know, as Jennifer Braswell and Larry and I discuss very frequently, we don't want to have this effect where we're passing the baton to somebody who doesn't know what they're getting. So essentially, we make sure that the whole team is integrated. So we're working essentially as one team. So we know what the products are, we know what the pitfalls are, and we know where we have to improve upon things. And we do this continuously because Kimmy stays on us, right, Kimmy? And Vicki.
Dr. Jamieson, while you have the mic, can you maybe spend a minute talking about some of the current advancements of clinical trials at the UC system and how you've been able to leverage and use as a springboard the CERM, the alpha clinics?
Well, I think that the major advance, as John Adams was alluding to, are the UCs really working together as a consortium to advance some of these trials, particularly for rare diseases. So I think that's the biggest advance, actually. I know you've been really seminally involved in that, Patty. I think the biggest surprise was having a private institution become a really strong part of that with City of Hope, and that they share the LA Data Repository because John made that available. I think here at UC San Diego, we have this incredible wealth of infrastructure, in large part thanks to Denny Sanford and UC San Diego Health investing in physical infrastructure. You know, we can all say it's great, we can work together, we can collaborate, but you actually need the physical space. So in the Jacobs Medical Center, we have 12 beds for patients who need to be admitted for their stem cell products, cellular products, anything that's stem cell related. We now have an outpatient pavilion that went up with remarkable alacrity. I know you spent days and nights on that, Patty, and certainly Teresa Jezevich from our team and Jennifer Braswell were involved in that. So we now have an open outpatient pavilion with a clinic at Sanford Stem Cell Clinical, or, you know, this clinical center where a lot of the therapies will be given in a strong partnership with our Morris Cancer Center. We also have the ACTL, the Advanced Cell Therapy Lab that Dan Kaufman runs, so we're very excited to partner with the ACTL to bring these products to the clinic as quickly as possible. And I think, you know, part of what we're trying to do is teach what we learned in the process of doing this. So we have a CREST course, getting back to the UC San Diego infrastructure, but it's also the CTSA infrastructure. So this is an infrastructure to enhance translation. And that's a course we teach on regenerative medicine. So we really want people to learn from our mistakes. That course includes Vicki Scheckler, includes other people that help with pre-IND meetings, so we can teach you what we learned and what we don't want you to have to go through. But maybe Joe can comment on this a little bit. We also have the Sanford Surgical Center, the training center, that allows surgeons and other practitioners to practice their therapy before they give it to a patient. And I think that seems to have been an important advance, that's infrastructure provided by the health system. I was wondering what Dr. Chachi thinks of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important part of our mission as a health system to educate and to change the way things are practiced. We call it the Center for the Future of Surgery because we want people to learn how to do things in the new ways that are going to be of benefit to patients. We don't want to have people continue to do things the way it's always been done, especially when we're introducing new technologies, and that includes devices and things that we're going to use during the surgical procedures. And so we've become quite a very busy center for educating surgeons and other practitioners in terms of interventions, with a great investment by the health system and the university into the facility, and we're really proud of that facility, and I think people are recognizing its value from all over the world.
Yeah, we have people all over the world coming. There's a question over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sorry, I got the mic. I'll give it to you in a second. Well, they gave it to me. I've been holding it. I'm not from UC, well, from the UC system. I'm from the Scripps Research Institute, which is another member of the consortium that lives right here.
Right.
And we don't have access to, at least we haven't had any formal access to the alpha stem cell clinics. But I have a question for Maria, actually, because there was an initiative for Quintiles, or the company formerly known as Quintiles. They had a CERM grant to assist us in our advisory capacity for our pre-INDs and INDs. And I'm just wondering why no one's brought that up yet, because the rest of you seem to have found your own group of experts, and yet CERM is supporting us for that.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I don't know if you wanted to first ask your question, but I actually did want to pipe in on that, because I think one of the major assets we have here with a network, with partnerships between CERM and all of our investigators and these institutions, is that CERM essentially acts as almost like a coordinating center. I mean, we really bring the folks together, put them together. We, by virtue of going through our peer review process and going through the process where every single award that's given by us has had to meet a certain rigor in terms of what's the impact and significance, what is the science behind this, what is the plan, what are the regulatory pathways that are in place, and how is this going to get to the patients. It goes through a rigorous peer review process before it's awarded to be supported by CERM, and then we have milestone-based payments so that folks are, so it asserts discipline in terms of this research being carried out a certain way. So all of that creates structure to how we're all working together. In addition to the Alpha Clinics Network, Jean, thank you for bringing it up, we have awarded through a competitive process a commercial partner in bringing in the CRO services, the preclinical research tools and services, et cetera, to supplement what all of the Alpha Clinics themselves have also put into place. By having all these, and that's IQVIA, Quintiles, IMS, and IMS, by the way, happens to have the largest data base capabilities in terms of post-marketing and, all sorts of, so there's, more on that in terms of what value that'll bring to the new frontier we have in front of us, which is patient access and reimbursement. Okay, so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is regulatory, and I think that Doug gave an excellent presentation just before the lunch and mentioned the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapies pathway, which is an expedited pathway created by the FDA, created by the 21st Century Cures Act, which is a bipartisan law that was put into place in December 2016. Last year was the first year that the RMAT designation had been in place. Of the first 3 RMATs, 2 of them were CERM programs. Of the first 11, 3 of them are CERM programs. We've had communications, very direct communication with Peter Marks and that team. And they are very interested in portfolio type approaches. Eventually, that's what we're looking to, because they're seeing that there is definitely value in, the FDA has a lot to look at, a lot to deal with. You hear the science that was presented to us today, and these are people who work on this every day. So imagine folks looking at this material and trying to determine all the pieces. So I think that just by virtue of being this ecosystem that we've created, we're going to be able to bring forward more uniformity in how information is shared. Then the expectations can be more aligned in terms of what they want to look at and what we give them, and that's going to add efficiency to the system. Joe brought up a very big point. It's not accelerate at the risk of compromising on quality or safety. That's not what we're about. It's accelerate safely. Accelerate by adding efficiencies to the system, by cutting out things that get in the way, of us getting to the patients if this needs to go to the patient. So Jean, I'm sorry that I don't know if I answered your question. IQVIA is up and running, yes, and the 3 platforms that we're trying to, build together are in 3 big buckets. One is called Target Product Profile, which is a clinical development path that's appropriate for the types of programs. We're looking at pharmacoeconomics and the regulatory platform that makes the RMAT kind of the model that we're looking at, because these are the type of programs we have, as well as all of the assistance that's needed in getting the preclinical research done. So they have a partnership with Charles River for designing and advising on preclinical studies. The City of Hope, as well as other WUJI and other partnership, along with Torsten Gorbas in the audience, who is with IQVIA, to provide process development and early manufacturing. Thankfully, all of the organizations that we're dealing with also have their expertise and their infrastructure, but it's putting it all together and learning from each other. So it's a very long answer. Hopefully it provided some information that's useful.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Well, actually,
Okay.
I'm sure every year you have budget time, and there's an X-ray machine that's worn out, and radiation oncology equipment and other things like that. So how's you and your team? How do you and your team look at the request to invest in research infrastructure? As worked up my career in different medical centers, there's as many different flavors medical centers there are medical centers. So what is it that UC Health sees as its mission to move the knowledge forward, and how do you and your team decide how to prioritize those investments?
Well, it's a good question. I'll answer for UCSD. Money is tight. Everybody knows that. Our cash is tight, and so we have to be careful about how we manage all 3 missions and make sure that they're well funded. So, we have a process of fair amount of transparency about where the dollars are and where they're going and what needs to happen. One thing that I think was, again, the benefit, I heard the word milestone a little bit ago. And one thing that Denny Sanford insisted on in doing this with us is that there be institution support and that there be milestones that are reached. And so so those are already baked. Like, I already have that in my budget for 10 years, what I'm going to do to support this effort. And then there are things that come on top of it as the sciences come along. Again, we've spent a lot of time, Dr. Jameson and myself, how are we going to staff the inpatient unit? What's that going to mean? How do we synergize? What's the scale? What kind of hospitalists do we need, et cetera? And we just work it out. We try to come up with a model that makes the most sense, that's efficient, that's cost effective, but also continues this effort going. But I would say the first thing is we set aside a certain amount of dollars that is going to be supportive of this effort, and that's the given. That's almost the baseline, and then everything else above it comes with. You can tell Dr. Jameson's very persuasive, and
Poor Patty. So fortunately, Patty listens really well, and thank you, Patty. So I just wanted to follow up on the Innovative Cell Therapy Service. So this is an idea that actually came from the person that was getting the most questions about these clinical trials, or the emergent INDs, and that was our chief of staff. And so she said, we need a service. We can't just be taking on all of these new therapies with people saying, oh, we emergently need to give this mesenchymal stromal cell product for somebody with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and then somebody else with multiple sclerosis. These really didn't make sense. So what we're trying to do with Patty's great leadership is to have an innovative cell therapy service that's distinct from approved therapies. And so when we come in with cellular therapies that Carl's developing with incredible speed, we will be able to have a service that can deal with the severe cytokine release syndrome. We are working with the Scripps Research Institute, and specifically Pete Schultz and Travis Young, who came to our Alpha Clinic meeting one Friday with their entire portfolio of products. And Dan is working to see if we can make those in the ACTL together with Vicki Scheckler to see if we can make that switchable CAR T-cell a clinical reality. So I think, it's the operational efficiency piece that Maria was bringing in is imbued throughout the stem cell approach, because these are expensive therapies. We may use the term innovative, but they're generally pretty expensive. So we've got to find a way to make it much more efficient for patients. But I was a bone marrow transplanter before. Those were incredibly expensive therapies and still are, but they're potentially curative therapies. And nobody's used the word curative because we're not allowed to say that anymore. But at least we can work on much more effective therapies where we don't tether somebody to an IV pole every month. We don't have to give people the same pill that costs $100,000 a year with a copay that's resting much more on patients' wallets. And this is something that I said to John before. We don't want people to have the wallet adverse event. Nobody talks about that, but it's a huge problem in clinics. So we really appreciate the support to develop infrastructure to come up with more effective therapies that may lead to treatment-free remissions.
I think the other thing I'd say about this is we went through the business plan for CAR T yesterday for the FDA-approved CAR T, and we're doing a lot of work with the payers and with the government, but obviously they're lagging behind where we need to be, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on the system. We're going to try to, as a UC system, have a conversation with the state about Medicaid patients and how we can do this work so we can get that pre-approved. I don't think we want to be in the position of doing therapy and then asking for reimbursement later on. It just doesn't work that way. So we're in kind of a little bit of a squishy place right now where hopefully we'll get paid. We're going to be reticent to do patients who we don't get paid for because it would bankrupt the system. And in fact, it was interesting because the UC Regents has a health services committee that we report to. And last month there was a presentation by Dr. Alan Ashworth from UCSF around CAR T, and it was really beneficial to get the regents engaged in this question and them understanding, the potential to lose $500,000 a patient and what that could mean to us as the three, UCLA, UCSF, and UCSD, do this work. So we're paying attention to it and trying to be smart about it, but it's a big challenge. Philanthropy is huge, honestly. Any other questions specifically? I'm going to go back to Sheila, if you don't mind, and actually the whole panel, but Sheila, and specifically where you see the science going, and back to the issue that we talked about with patients getting wooed into non-approved products. How do you think about the communication of the development of the science and kind of the public nature of it and what we should be doing better to communicate the successes?
Yeah, I think that's a really important role that journals can play. For all the papers that we publish, we work really closely with institutional press offices and our own internal press offices to make sure that we're not overselling what the research is. And in part, when we have papers that we think are going to draw a lot of interest and potentially be confusing for a lay audience, we specifically work on press releases to make sure that we convey both the potential value of the research, but also explain very carefully when things are mouse studies, when there is a long gap between what we've shown preclinically and the next steps. So journals play an important role for that. The other thing that I think is really important and Cell Stem Cell really focuses on, Doug mentioned earlier, is we publish a lot of articles that are meant to educate both scientists and the public about what's happening in terms of regulatory affairs, the ethics of stem cell science, and what's happening commercially. I think it's important for scientists to really be well-versed in these issues so that when we talk with the public, we know what is happening. A lot of the times, people really just focus on their own research and they really aren't paying attention to what's happening more broadly. And the best way to communicate with people is, or one of the most effective ways is face-to-face. And we also try to make all these articles freely available, the ones that are, for example, talking about direct-to-consumer marketing internationally. I do think we could be doing that better. Perhaps one of you guys could talk about what clinicians are doing in terms of communicating with your patients.
I think we've got 3 physicians here, actually 4, because Maria is a transplant surgeon for liver. But in terms of what we're doing to communicate with our patients, we'll hear from a patient and patient advocate. I think we can communicate to patients, but often patients communicate to us what they need, and we don't necessarily listen. So the first thing you learn in medical school is listen to the patient. They're telling you the diagnosis. But now the patients are telling each other the diagnosis and able to use social media to learn about clinical trials in real time. And so that's really a remarkable advance, and something we're going to hear a little bit more about. I think now to communicate with patients, what you're really helping with, Sheila, is making these original articles freely available. Public access, open access is incredibly important. People want to read Carl June's original papers. They want to see what was really tested, and they come to clinic armed with this stuff. Right, Andrew? So the people are reading the primary papers, and they're having scientists interpret it with them. So this is an incredible advance in medicine. It makes clinic visits a little bit longer for the work RVU-driven model, but ultimately I think keeps people healthier, because then they know what the potential pitfalls are. They know what they're getting into a little bit more. And knowing that we're doing clinical trials where we don't necessarily know everything a priori, it's really important to advise about the risks we know, and then those that we don't know, and that we're going to communicate in real time, not wait for reports at the end of a clinical trial. So I think that's really important, and the fact that you help us with that is great.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we've had, and we've talked about this at the Sanford governing board, around when do you communicate and what's the right time, and we're reticent to go too soon, and we do a lot of, we wrap ourselves up in our own underwear about the timing, which is an issue, but know that this other side is going on. My mother-in-law was in a hospital the other day, and someone put a flyer in her, on her car, and she came back and she kept it for me, and it was, I'm the only one in Coachella Valley that does stem cells, and I'm going to heal you, do X, Y, Z. So there's this other side that's not quite as reticent to talk about themselves, even if they don't have the scientific backing. So I think it's a challenge. I think relative to communication, how we do it. Please.
I would say that we are seeing an increasing understanding from the general public in terms of the issues. And I get emails even from personal, contacts of their relatives saying, hey, I'm hearing that there's this clinic, and it's referring me to clinicaltrials.gov, and they can cure everything from a migraine to paralysis. And it doesn't seem right that they're asking it for money, because what is the recourse if it doesn't work, and my insurance doesn't cover it. So the general public is getting so much better at this. So it is permeating some of the things we put through the ISSCR with the early, closer look at stem cells. It's going through the messaging that came today, Doug. I mean, I think if we had 4 things, if you have to pay for it, if it's something that your insurance isn't going to cover, if they are not actually haven't published in the space, but they're offering this, or they don't have, credible partners in this that you could talk to, and they actually own the product, and it's not FDA approved. The public is very, very, very educated now in terms of, because of social media and everything else. But I just want to make one other point. With CIRM, we involve the patients in our process. They're on our clinical advisory panels, and they bring the most amazing wealth of insight and information in terms of what should the informed consent include, and what about this aspect of this. And it seems like an ancillary piece of the protocol, but what does this mean in terms of fertility later? Looking forward, because more and more the word cure is being used, because there are curative therapies that are being, in the early, potentially curative therapies that are in pivotal phase now. And so people are looking beyond the treatment. And so anyway, I just wanted to make that point, that we are seeing much more engagement, and we are personally, not personally, but our organization is pushing for it. We have over 1,000 advocates that are signed up to help us get the word out to other to their stakeholders and to the
I do think,
foundations.
right, I do think that strategic use of social media is really important, and I do get, I'm on Facebook, because that's how I keep track of all my swimming friends, but I do get the CERM push out. I'm not sure if I've liked the page yet or not, Maria, so I'll go back and make sure I hit the like, so I get everything
your
you,
like.
you do, but no, I think it becomes a very huge communication piece. So maybe one last question for Dr. Hood, if you don't mind, speaking a little bit about, what you think the opportunity is for your patients now with your drug approved, and how you see that playing out would be terrific.
Well, yeah, it's a dream scenario. The genesis of this company started when patients and physicians reached out to me and they wanted the drug back, and it's because the drug works where there's nothing else available. It's for a disease where patients are going to die in 2 to 3 years, and this has a profound benefit for them. So the fact we're able to get it back to them, there's nothing more rewarding in life. That's the dream. Get something that truly helps people.
Well, I didn't know you were going to end on that note, but I have to say that's, what we're so grateful for at the end of the day. Our true north is curing patients, and we're grateful for all that you do. I'm going to ask Dr. Jameson to come up and do an introduction, or are you going to do it from there?
Introduction, oh, yes.
Yes. You're up.
No, never off the hook.
Are we dismissed, Kat?
Yes. Yes, I think I'd like to dismiss the panel for their very hard work. You can see.